What is the most freaked up thing you've ever witnessed? User 1. This is probably the most messed up thing I've ever seen. I was walking home late at night, and I saw a man in a clown costume just standing there in the middle of the sidewalk. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, staring at me. I tried to walk around him, but he moved to block my path. I ended up running away, and he chased me for a couple of blocks before giving up. The whole thing was terrifying. User 2. Wow, that's pretty freaky. My story is a bit more on the dramatic side. I was on vacation in Thailand with my friends, and we were out partying one night. We ended up at this bar that was packed with people, and everyone was having a great time. Out of nowhere, this guy gets up on the stage and starts doing a fire-breathing act. It was amazing at first, but then he accidentally set himself on fire. The whole place erupted in chaos as people tried to put him out. Thankfully, he survived, but it was one of the most intense things I've ever seen. User 3, that's pretty crazy. Mine is more on the bizarre side. I was at a park with my kids when I saw a group of people dressed as wizards having a full-on-one duel. They were shouting spells and everything. It was like something out of a Harry Potter movie. Turns out it was a group of LARPers, but it was definitely a strange sight to see. User 4, I was driving home from work late one night when I saw a car pulled over on the side of the road. As I got closer, I realized there was a woman standing next to the car, completely naked. She was frantically waving her arms, trying to get my attention. I pulled over to see if she needed help, and she told me that her boyfriend had kicked her out of the car during an argument. I ended up giving her a ride to a nearby gas station so she could call someone for help. It was definitely one of the weirdest things I've ever witnessed. User 5, wow, these stories are wild. Mine is a bit on the twisted side. I used to work in a grocery store, and we had a regular customer who would come in every week and buy a ton of cat food. One day, I went over to help her with her groceries, and she started telling me about her fur babies. She had over 100 cats living in her tiny apartment, and she was convinced they could talk to her. She told me they had their own little society, with a king and queen cat and everything. I'm pretty sure she was just lonely, but it was definitely bizarre. User 6, here's my story. I was at a friend's party, and there was this girl there who was obviously very drunk. She was stumbling around and slurring her words, and at one point, she walked over to the fish tank and tried to free the fish by pouring them onto the floor. She was scooping them up with her hands and just tossing them onto the ground. People were freaking out, and it took a while to get everything under control. The poor fish didn't make it. User 7, I was on a hiking trip with some friends, and we decided to camp out overnight in the woods. We were sitting around the campfire, swapping scary stories, when we started hearing strange noises coming from the woods. It sounded like someone was crying, but it was really faint. We decided to investigate and followed the sound deeper into the forest. As we got closer, the crying turned into laughter, and it became clear that it was actually a group of people. We stumbled upon some sort of cult ritual or ceremony. They were all dressed in black robes, and there was a huge bonfire in the center of their circle. We freaked out and immediately turned around and ran back to our campsite. We didn't sleep much that night, and we left as soon as the sun came up. User 8, here's my story. I used to live in a small town, and there was this guy who was known for being a bit of a recluse. He lived in a rundown house on the outskirts of town and rarely left. One day, I was walking my dog near his property, and I saw him dragging a huge bag across his yard. It looked like there was something heavy inside, and he was struggling to move it. I was curious, so I hid behind some bushes and watched him. He ended up burying the bag in his backyard. I have no idea what was inside, but it definitely seemed like he was trying to hide something. User 9, my story takes place in a hospital where I was working as a nurse. One night, I was assigned to the psych ward, and I was doing my rounds, checking on patients. I entered one room where a patient was supposed to be restrained, but the bed was empty. I started to panic, thinking they had somehow managed to escape. I turned around to leave the room, and the patient was standing right behind me, completely silent. They had managed to slip out of their restraints and sneak up behind me without making a sound. I nearly had a heart attack on the spot. User 10, okay, this one is really weird. I was at a restaurant with some friends, and we were having a nice dinner. At the table next to us, there was a couple who seemed to be on a date. The guy was acting really strange, like he was super nervous or something. At one point, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. It looked like he was about to propose, so we all got really excited. But instead of a ring, he pulled out a human tooth and placed it on the table in front of the girl. She screamed and ran out of the restaurant, leaving him sitting there with the tooth. We have no idea what was going on, but it was definitely one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. User 11, here's my story. I was visiting my aunt, who lived in a rural area. One day, we decided to go for a walk in the woods behind her house. We came across this old, abandoned house that looked like it had been there for decades. It was really creepy, and we decided to go inside and explore. It was like stepping back in time. There were old newspapers, clothes, and furniture just left behind. In one of the bedrooms, we found a creepy-looking doll sitting on the bed. It had this sinister smile on its face and was holding a rusty knife. We got out of there as fast as we could and never went back. User 12, here's a bizarre one for you. I was at a music festival, and everyone was dancing and having a great time. I noticed this guy in the crowd who was wearing a full-body chicken costume. He was dancing like crazy, and everyone was cheering him on. At one point, he climbed up onto the stage and started dancing with the band. Security tried to get him off the stage, but he kept dodging them and continued dancing. Eventually, they managed to catch him and escort him off the stage. But instead of being mad, the crowd started chanting "Free the chicken," and the guy in the chicken costume became a sort of legend for the rest of the festival. User 13, my story is a bit more on the twisted side. I was in college, and my roommate was known for sleepwalking. One night, I woke up to some weird noises coming from the kitchen. I went to investigate, and I found my roommate standing in the kitchen, completely asleep, trying to cook a frozen pizza on the stove. The weirdest part was that he had taken off all his clothes and was wearing nothing but an apron. I managed to wake him up, and he was just as confused as I was. We had a good laugh about it the next day, but it was definitely a strange experience. User 14, I've got a freaky one for you. I was working at a haunted house attraction around Halloween, and my job was to hide in the shadows and jump out at people as they walked through. I was in a room with a bunch of fake spiders hanging from the ceiling when I noticed a real, massive spider crawling up the wall. It was the size of my hand and looked terrifying. I'm terrified of spiders, so I started freaking out, which, in turn, freaked out the guests who were walking through the haunted house. It turned into this chaotic scene where everyone was screaming and running away from the spider, and I was just as scared as they were. My boss eventually came in and caught the spider, but it was one of the most terrifying moments of my life. User 15, here's my story. I was on a road trip with some friends, and we stopped at a rest area in the middle of nowhere. There was a small playground nearby, so we decided to stretch our legs and play around for a bit. We noticed a guy sitting on one of the swings, just staring at us. He wasn't doing anything else, just sitting there and watching. It started to get really creepy, so we decided to leave. As we were driving away, we looked back, and the guy was still sitting on the swing, watching us. It was like something out of a horror movie. User 16, these stories are wild. Mine is a bit more bizarre. I was at a flea market, and there was a vendor selling taxidermy animals. One of the items he had for sale was a two-headed squirrel. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. The guy claimed it was a genuine mutation, but I'm pretty sure it was just two squirrels stitched together. Either way, it was definitely a freaky sight to see. User 17, I was walking my dog one evening when I saw a group of people standing in a circle in the middle of a field. They were all dressed in black, holding hands and chanting something. As I got closer, I realized they were performing some sort of ritual. There was a makeshift altar in the center of the circle, and it looked like they were trying to summon something. I didn't want to get involved, so I quickly turned around and headed back home. It was definitely one of the most bizarre things I've ever witnessed. What about you? What is the most freaked up thing you've ever witnessed? Let us know in the comments section below. When you subscribe, be sure to click the notification bell. Click here for more Tangled threads.